Welcome to Bounce, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of product teams, the challenges they face, and the incredible stories of resilience that emerge. I'm Molly Cox, your co-host, a product designer with a knack for navigating through the storms of creativity.
And I'm your co-host, Claire Flowers, a product manager who's seen it all. The highs, the lows, and everything in between.
Each week we'll bring you tales of product traumas, those moments that test our limits, they push our boundaries, and sometimes bring us to our knees.
We're talking about career flops and follies and those pivotal moments when everything seems to fall apart.
But as we know, the harder you fall, the higher you bounce. We'll explore with our guests their toughest challenges,
The actions they took to overcome them.
and how these experiences have shaped their careers and continue to impact them today.
So join us in this journey of resilience, growth, and bouncing back stronger than ever. Okay. Welcome to Bounce. My name is Claire Flowers. I am a co-host here at Bounce Podcast. I'm joined with Molly Cox, my co-host, and also Shegan Otulana. Shegan, welcome to Bounce.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Molly.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
We're very excited to have you today. I'm very excited about Shegan joining us for the podcast. Shegan and I both live in Birmingham, Alabama. And Shegan came to the U.S. back in 1998 from Nigeria and landed in Birmingham, went to school here, started his first company. It was right after you graduated, right, Shegan, about 2003?
Yes, the first iteration.
Yeah,
was
the
right,
first iteration,
yeah.
and has just been extremely successful in the product world. He sold his company Theranest for about 1.25 billion, a 1.25 billion exit, which is one of the largest in Alabama's history, as I saw on your website. So we're really excited to talk with you today. One of the things that I read about you, Shegan, was during college you delivered pizzas to pay for tuition. So that if that's if that's not resilience, I don't know what is. And that's what we really like to talk to product folks about here on Bounce. So to kick us off, I'd love to know what really inspired you to become an entrepreneur and grow product companies.
I think the inspiration, some of it is probably genetic, to be honest with you. Um, and then it's a combination of nature and nurture really pushing you in that particular direction. In this case, me. I'm a child of small business owners. So i- 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 we live life with models in mind, right? So the only model I kind of knew growing up was my parents owning a business. I didn't really see a model of my parents having a job, uh, and then couple that with just a natural tendency towards entrepreneurship, and I think my destiny was probably pre-written if I was optimizing for my happiness. If you get what I mean, yeah.
What do you think is the youngest you like? Did you have a business idea when you were in, 12? I know I did. And when I was in fourth grade, I tried to start my own business. It was a terrible, colossal failure, one of the first failures in my life. But a lot of times we innately have that in us. So I'm curious if in the past you ever, when you were younger, tried to start businesses back when you were in Nigeria.
Yeah, there are a few instances of that. So it's the typical thing most young people do. I had a video game system. I kind of put it out there and made people pay me to play. you know, it's things like that. You have 5 pieces of gum. You sell 2 or 3 out of the 5. There was also a period where I went to boarding school, and I would, when you're in boarding school, sometimes you get what we would call provisions, like food and things like that, that your parents would bring you or that you would go buy, and I would always try to sell it to my fellow students. So I think it's always kind of been there my whole life. I remember a time where one of my cousins and I would take plantains. I don't know if you guys know what plantains are, and we'll
Yep.
kind of fry them with like fried plantain chips with water bottles, and we'll go to like concerts and things like that and try to sell it to concert goers because they're hungry or they need water. So I think there's just been different instances of that my whole life. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
have kind of felt that drive. Yeah.
I
I
think there's
definitely,
an element of seeking freedom that's also part of it, right? Seeking freedom, wanting to build things. And then it shows up for different people in different ways. So for some people, seeking freedom is the ability to do your best work between 9 and 5 and then not have to worry about it. That's the kind of freedom they seek. For some people, seeking freedom is any environment that lets you just create the thing you like creating every day, nonstop. And that's just the ultimate joy you get. And then I think for entrepreneurs, seeking freedom is just the ability to control your time and resources to making money and building a product and selling things. And that's what gets you fired up every day and you feel free. So I think it expresses itself in different ways.
I think that's so well said. Can you take us back to the first versions of the first product that you started and walk us through what was the inspiration for that and how
The
that started?
failures or the successes? Which one?
Let's talk about failures first.
Yeah, let's go all angles.
Oh man, yeah. I think I tried to build things starting back since 2003, 2004. There were certain ideas I had that were maybe would have succeeded in the age of SaaS, but they didn't succeed because they were a little too early. There were ideas that I had that if it had been built in the age of mobile technologies, it would have probably been very, very successful. So most of those pretty much failed. I also remember one of the first products we built was, most people don't know this story, but we had built a server, like an office server system out of the Linux operating system. And we were selling it to small business owners to give them their own email and, file servers because they couldn't afford the Windows network system. That was a failure because obviously everybody ended up just being able to afford it or go to the cloud and things like that. So there are so many iterations. I remember my first version of a field management software that I had built on WAP devices. I don't know if you guys remember WAP devices, the old phones. That was just cumbersome. If I had waited another 5 years, it would probably have been very, very successful. So there are many versions of the failure out there.
What I'm hearing from that is how important timing is. Is there anything that you decided not to pursue that you still think about today?
No, not really. But like you said, timing is such a huge factor in success for everything, really for everything in life. And there are probably ways you can try to get timing right. It's one of the things we try to think about here at HVL in the studio is are we right timing wise? You can't be 100% sure, but there are ways to think about it. But if you get timing wrong, there's almost nothing you can do to fix that. The only option you have is if you have ridiculously deep pockets, you may be able to wait it out if it's not some crazy, crazy distance. But here is the problem, even when you have deep pockets, right? Because technology is changing and society is changing, the thing you built earlier on when you got the timing wrong, the idea may be right, but now technology trends and everything has moved. So even though you may have gotten the idea right, because of when you built the product, you may have to build something else, even when the time now comes. Just like the example I gave you, I got the timing right around field management software and the ability to take payments in the field and route your drivers correctly from a mobile device. But can you imagine all the infrastructure I built and everything else transferring 5 years later? No, obviously not. So I would literally have had to change how I think, change the kind of devices, how customers want to interact with the product. So that's the danger with timing. Not only do you end up missing it on resource allocation, you sometimes also miss it on technology inflections that you can take advantage of. And if you miss that, then it's really just a challenge.
I'd love to go back to, if you don't mind telling us a little bit, you mentioned Harmony Venture Labs. Tell us a little bit about what you do there. And then I want to dig into some of the ways that you evaluate timing when you are talking about bringing new products to market.
Yeah, so Harmony Venture Labs, HVL, is a venture studio that I created after selling Theranest and therapy brands. And because it became clear to me that the place I get my energy from, the thing I want to do for decades of my life, is to continue to experiment and learn and bring new things into the world, I decided to launch a venture studio. And the venture studio gives me the ability to just do that with entrepreneurs, do that with corporations, do that with anybody that's looking to be creative and build something. So that's what HVL does. We primarily just look for problems in the world to go solve. And then we try to do it with entrepreneurs. We try to do it with companies. We have our own internal ideas that we come up with. It's a place to just do interesting things with an eye towards creating a new venture. Because we want to see entrepreneurs in the world. We want to see new companies in the world. And I also believe that a venture studio is just a higher form, maybe not higher in the sense of better, but a different form of venture capital allocation. And that's kind of the approach we take to it. And we've developed certain practices through learning, through trial and error, around what makes an idea great, or what makes an idea worth pursuing. How can you find great ideas? Where do problems live so you can go experiment? And how do you really look for things that are non-obvious? Like, what kind of position can you place yourself to find things that are non-obvious to the rest of the world, or things that are obvious but need to be delivered in a different way? And that's a lot of the work at HVL. So today that may come from us internally. More and more of it is beginning to come from just corporations trying to be innovative and asking us to kind of guide them through that journey. I also run one of the first companies that came out of HVL called Copysmith AI, which is a generative AI software company, really helping people communicate effectively through our platforms. So we have software that's for e-commerce space called Describely.ai, used by companies like Target and Boschheims and Euronics and all kinds of companies, really to just communicate effectively around their product and product discovery on their e-commerce platforms. And then we have Phrase, which is a lot around research-driven writing. So a lot of search engine optimization type content gets done on Phrase. And then we have Writer, that's kind of general AI writing. It was pretty much ChatGPT before ChatGPT. Talk about timing on that one. But in aggregate,
You're right there.
Yeah, so close.
Just doing great stuff. Yeah. So that's a lot of the work at Copysmith AI. And then we have other types of companies within HVL. Some of them are early stage research, and some of them are ongoing concerns. We even have one product that's the only non-tech product we have. That's a drink. It's a beverage that we decided to launch because we felt it was unique, it was different. It was influenced by where I grew up, and we'll see if the market agrees with us or not. So that's a lot of what we do at HBL.
Sorry, go for it, Molly.
Well, I wanna go back to you're talking about ideas, and I'm very curious. Like, with this whole org that you've created, it's all about ideas now and getting those to come to fruition. And I'm probably opening Pandora's box with this question, but what is a good idea to you? What when you look at something, what makes it great? What is that recipe?
So I think on the surface, it's hard to know what's a good idea. It takes a little bit of discovery to know if an idea is good or not. And what makes an idea good many times, depending on the scale of what you're trying to build, is what does it fundamentally change? What behavior change does it drive that is not true today or is about to be significantly true? So when you think about ideas, you want to also think about trends to an extent, uh, because the thing you want with an idea is mostly tailwinds. So when you execute on an idea and the success of the idea is pretty much dependent on your ability to fully execute, you get in trouble much, much easily than if an idea is primarily driven by tailwinds around maybe things happening in technology, society's trends, um, a new thing that allows you to serve a market that was previously unservable for whatever reason. Some ideas are even interesting because they're mission oriented, and the energy you get from them being mission oriented will drive you through walls if you have to. So there are lots of great ideas in the world. It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish with that idea. And the bigger the thing you're trying to accomplish with the idea, the more the idea will probably need to have multiple elements to be successful. Elements of technology being a tailwind, elements of new market being served that weren't served before, elements of behavioral change in society. Like a lot of all those things have to kind of come together. So if you take Theranest, for example, part of what made it very successful was it was a combination of a new business model around software as a service that had changed behavior around how people buy software. That was also being pushed by the government pushing HIPAA and compliance around HIPAA, that a lot of these practices felt compelled to have to deal with. But at the same time, they were also living in a world where they wanted their software to look like Facebook. And they wanted their software to not require them to install it on a server in the back room. So when you have an idea that kind of combines all those elements, you're very much more likely to be successful than not. So a lot of what we look for in ideas are how many elements around this idea will give it a tailwind to make it more likely to succeed. Because the idea can be great and it's not going to go anywhere because it's 100% dependent on execution. And when something is 100 dependent on execution, that's a tough thing. Or maybe not 100%, but the less tailwinds you have, the higher your level of execution has to be for you to even have a chance of success at something that's already very difficult to succeed in, this whole game of entrepreneurship. So that's what we mean by good ideas. So an idea on the surface can be good, but then when you dig in and it doesn't have these elements, is it still a good idea? I don't know, because your chances of succeeding with that idea drop significantly. So it may be good on the surface, but it's not good executionally until maybe 5 years from now. Talk about timing again. Or it's not good until people's behavior change around something. A good example would be if you were selling software to help people do remote events. It's a great idea, but until COVID, you probably couldn't really scale very, very well, right? But that doesn't mean it's a bad idea. But that idea was lacking a lot of elements that would make it a great idea. But the thing is, you also have to find something that's sustainable over time. So if the behavior change around COVID is only for a short period of time, and it's not a permanent or semi-permanent change in behavior, your idea is still going to get you in trouble, because at some point you're going to get the rise and then you're going to get the crash, because it's a fad and it has not become a fundamental change in how people do things. So when we think about good ideas, we're actually thinking about ideas that, because of other elements around those ideas, it is supported by a different way of doing things. Maybe it's because of a new business model, a new technology, the government is making you do it, like all kinds of things around that. Yeah.
I'm curious, like going from one of the things as a PM, my brain is always so energized by new ideas and new products, and it feels like it's hard to control all of the sources of ideas. Do you feel like it's a crowded space now from the time when, startups were starting to become popular and you had incubators that were coming around? Have you felt like now you're really in the space? Do you feel like it's very crowded or no?
Which space are you talking about? You mean entrepreneurship in general?
Entrepreneurship.
Yes, I believe it's crowded, but it depends on when in history you're talking about. You just have to remember there was a point in history where we were all entrepreneurs.
Right. Fair.
so so again, you have to. What lens are you looking through is also a factor there, right? Because there was a time in human history where, for the most part, you had to be your own means of production, and everybody was pretty much an entrepreneur. And then things kind of changed, and maybe we're kind of going back to that in a sense because the means of delivery, the tools for production are becoming democratized, so more people can just do things. And we all know that the AI trend is going to probably accelerate that because you can be so much more productive that many people will just do things because it's possible for them with the tools out there to do those things. So if somebody is worried about crowding, they're about to be in for a ride because I think it's going to get even more crowded and crowded, which means not only do your ideas need to be fantastic, but now your execution needs to be just ridiculously great. I think that's what that means because it's the walls are coming down. And you can see how these walls have come down over time. Before, money was the big thing, and you needed a ton of money to start something, and that started going away. Of course, there are still some things that you still need a lot of money to start. But the things you need a lot of money to start started shrinking, and there were more things that you needed less money to start. So that doesn't mean money goes away in entrepreneurship, but the way you think about money and allocation of financial capital changes because of the nature of building companies is changing. So the crowding is fine. I think the world needs more entrepreneurs. The world needs more people building things. I think net that's actually a positive thing for the world. Yeah.
It's interesting. I've always been on the design side, and I feel like anyone in product would really tell you at the end of the day, the root of what we do is creative problem solving, right? And I've always said like, oh man, if I just had an idea, right? I feel like ideas are the hardest part about it. Executing seems like second nature to me at this point. So being somebody who has difficulty kind of finding those ideas out in the wild, how do you identify gaps in the market, and what process what's your process for really validating these ideas? You said there's tailwinds that come up. How do you evaluate it?
So you have to go to places where interesting things are happening if you want ideas, because it's very hard to come up with an idea by yourself in a vacuum. We're all elements of the surroundings we find ourselves, and those surroundings are just sources of information. That's what I mean by that. So that could be interpersonal, that could be from digital information. It's information from everywhere else. So the more interesting your information source is, the more likely you're going to introduce yourself to interesting ideas. So we optimize for how interesting the environment we've created is. Are we introducing ourselves to more interesting people doing interesting things, even if some of it is crazy? And your brain starts connecting the dots. That's really what happens. I think the brain takes information that you put in it, and then it makes connections and creates relationships. And the more you do that, the more of it does. And then if you have more people doing that, then there are more people kind of doing that all around you. So ideas actually originate from being around ideas. If you really want a lot of ideas, you have to find yourself in situations and around people that have a lot of ideas, or maybe they don't think of it as ideas, but they're just doing interesting things, and that's step one. And then step two would be extend the range of that idea thing, because sometimes you surround yourself with interesting ideas, but they're within a small area, right? So you may surround yourself with people doing interesting things, but they're all mostly designers. Well, the problem is you're all probably thinking about the same problems. But then when you introduce people that are maybe marketers, or you introduce people that are engineers, or you introduce people that are writers, or you introduce people that are accountants and bankers, all of a sudden you start saying, oh, this thing that happened here, there's a version of it that happened here. Interesting. Where else is a version of this happening? And then that starts opening your mind. And then you add to that reading books. I think biographies really trigger the mind to kind of see how things repeat over time. So that would be my number one recommendation, because you come up with ideas not because you have an objective. And that's the struggle for people. Like if you have a plan in mind and you have a clear objective in mind, it's actually harder to get it right. But if you're just interested in going in a particular direction, then interesting things happen. If you show up here in the 1600s and you're trying to get to the Pacific coast, right? And you're looking for a map, you're probably going to not get to the Pacific coast. But if you show here, maybe it's the 15 or 1400s, I don't know. But you show up here and you have a compass and you just start the journey, you probably create the first map. Right? Exactly. Because you're just on this interesting quest. And you don't know how you're going to get there. You just have a general sense of the direction you're going, and you go around this mountain here, you discover something new, you go around this thing here, you discover, hey, these people do this thing this way here. And I never even knew these people were here. So there's an element of that to ideas and creation and products that you kind of have to let serendipity do its thing. With guardrails, you need constraints. Constraints lead to creativity, but you can't have step one, step two, step three in the journey. You just let this discovery thing happen, which people struggle with a lot. And part of why people struggle with it is because most of us come into our professional world, or into the world in general, with structures and objectives in mind. So from when you're born at school, you have an objective every day at school. You have the thing you have to get. You have the grades you have to go get. And then you get into work and you have KPIs and you have the thing you have to go do, and on and on and on. But ideas and new discovery and company creation don't really work like that at the early stage. But over time, the thing you build becomes complex, more complex, more complex. And then you have this complex organism that's a company, a fully well-functioning company. And that's what most of us come into. So that's the normal. Except that for you to actually build that company, you have to go back to when it was this ambiguous, unformed, weird thing that you learned. As you learned, you increase the level of complexity. As you learned, you increase the level of complexity. And then you have this thing that you're working in today. So the challenge is to take your head and take it back to the beginning when there was nothing, and then learn and build and learn and build and see where it goes. Because many times the path you're going to take is going to be very, very different from whatever you had planned ahead of time. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, I think that when I think about the stories that we hear from folks like yourself, it's always kind of a serendipitous way that they built any particular product, and it's rooted in the industry that they found themselves in. they're in an industry, they identify a problem, and to your point, you just start moving on it. And I think that the model for incubators is a little bit strange because it doesn't necessarily allow for, like, especially incubators, you just start with an idea, because you make so many assumptions early on and you're not actually learning through that whole process. So I think that the approach of starting with an idea and not getting too far ahead of yourself makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I didn't even start. My huge success didn't even come in an industry that I had any experience in. I was clearly guided by a set of principles that were my constraints. And those principles had nothing to do with whether I knew anything. I put together in the V2 of my journey back to entrepreneurship, I pretty much said, I look for something that I can work on for the next 10 years of my life in an industry I would love serving for the next 10 years of my life. I wanted it to be a very large market, but a clear opportunity to find a place to start from. I wanted it to match my personality, which meant I didn't want to start out having to hire a sales team and go do outbound sales. I wanted it to be taking advantage of some kind of technology inflection of some sort. So I wanted it to be a SaaS business out of the gate. I needed it to be something that could be SaaS. And 5, I needed it to be something I could build a team around, because I'm freaking lazy and I procrastinate. And I succeed because I bring people together to go do something. Like, I'm not one of those people that wake up at 3 a.m. every day and they've lived 5 lifetimes before the rest of us wake up.
That makes me feel so much better to hear you say that.
So I needed something that I could, like, maybe today there's a version of me that wants to do the one-man entrepreneur thing, right? But that was not me back then. I still don't think it's me today. So if I found something that I could get up every day and be ridiculously successful doing it just by myself and make a ton of money, I would still not be happy. And I knew that. So those were my frameworks. And every time I interacted with a problem, I just placed it next to those things and saw whether it fell through the filter or not. And sometimes I would deceive myself and I would go ahead with something that I didn't really stand against those filters. And then at a particular point, I'll come to the conclusion that, dude, can you just really stick to this framework? So, because yes, there were times I was tempted because something was just so exciting. I was like, I'm going to do it anyway. And then eventually I'm like, no, I think this is not going to work. So you don't even have to be in the industry that you have experience in. I knew absolutely nothing about mental health when I started Theranest. But I learned, my customers carried me along, my team carried me along, and we built something very successful.
So talk to us about using that framework. Can you tell us a little bit a story about how Copysmith came to be? Can you think back to when it started clicking for you and talk us through how that happened?
Yeah, so now you think about Copysmith. I've had multiple successes. I've been part of different companies. By the time Copysmith came around, I had exited a $1 billion plus company. There was probably some elements of arrogance in there with Copysmith that, arrogance is a wonderful way to get in trouble. So Copysmith came about because I just believed a major thing was AI. And it was something I had been following, and I was looking for my way in. And I started talking to the original builder of the Copysmith software. And she had a lot going on, and I said, I'll take it from you and run with it. Partly because they had early access to OpenAI, and I wanted to take advantage of that. As it turns out, not long after that, OpenAI actually became available for everybody. So
the world had it.
And, so you see, that's kind of how the world works sometimes. So I thought I was getting this insider access to something, and that's not really what happened. But that was how that journey started. The interest there was just around generative AI, and I saw it as an entry point. If I wasn't as fortunate as I was, I probably wouldn't have taken that entry point, because that was an entry point that required me to pay for me to now own the company, right? Exactly. So I'll probably have started differently, where I would be building the thing by myself and then see where it goes. But because I have resources, I'm like, I'm just going to buy my way into the thing. The thing is, you can't just buy your way into building startups if you want to build interesting things. So at the end of the day, we still have to get back to building interesting things and understanding our customers and building the market. So even the original version of Copysmith that we acquired no longer exists at all. You can't even buy it. Exactly. Because we still have to get back to that journey of building a product and everything else. Did the early days of Copysmith help us? Yes, we did a lot of customer discovery with those customers. We found our niche starting point within the market. Where can AI actually be differentiated, and how do we position ourselves? Because we had that customer base, we had the early product, we had cash coming from that product. Yes, it did help us. So, but that's really how my journey started. I was like looking for one of those interesting things, and clearly it was going to be generative AI, and I saw this early way to get in, and I kind of jumped on it. Turns out you're not that smart, Shegan. Everybody else thought this thing was
But you were
early.
earlier than most.
Yes, we were earlier than most, but there were lots of people thinking about it. So, and it's worked out great. The company is doing great. But that's how that came about. It was just one of those, what's changing in the world in a way that's going to fundamentally change how we behave and how we work. And that was clearly one of those things. Yeah.
So from a lot of what you've been saying, earlier, one of the pillars that you were talking about was not doing it alone, right? And then in this situation, there was already another person. So you sound extremely gregarious, if you will, like very, very much wanting to work with teams and things along those lines. And I think when you're building your own thing, hiring the right people and really building that from the ground up is so critical and crucial to how you scale and your growth. So when you're looking for people, what qualities are you looking for very specifically when you're looking for those early partners, and then even when you get in towards scaling?
Yeah, looking for great people is one of the hardest things to do in
Yep.
this business. And nobody ever gets it right 100%, but you can increase the chances that you get it right. You always have to be looking for people. That's one thing, both internally. And so when I say internally, that means, what's this person's potential? You always have to be thinking about that. And how can I nurture it and lean into it? And then externally, I believe you start with alignment of values and operating principles. So for everybody that you bring into an organization, you just want to find ways to see whether you align on values and operating principles. And the way you do that is uncomfortable for the person you're hiring, and you have to just be okay with that. You have to be okay with them going on Glassdoor and saying, hey, the way these people hire, I don't like it. Because who cares? Okay. What matters more is the people who get in saying, this is a great place for me to fulfill my potential. Now, I am not saying be a jerk to people you're trying to hire. I'm not saying make them uncomfortable. I'm saying the process has to be involved. Like, so don't hire somebody after one interview. One, find alignment of values. And the only way to do that is to really ask a lot of situational questions that can be difficult, and ask it over and over from multiple people coming at it with multiple perspectives inside your organization. So the funnel is the funnel. You use all the channels to bring the people in. You quickly find ways to weed through them. That's just level stuff. If you can make it through that level, you shouldn't even be in the conversation, because this thing is going to be a tedious process anyway. And then you allow multiple people in your organization that you've given guidelines around, how do I get to the behavioral things that help me know whether I align with this person on a values and operating principles standpoint. And then you take everybody's response and find as much as possible, qualitative way to gauge who rises to the top. And then you don't compromise on the experience side, but that's just table stakes. So clearly you have to find a way to get the experience side depending on the job. If it's operational, the way you get to the experience side is going to be different than if it's design, than if it's engineering or sales. But those are the only ways I know to kind of at least significantly increase your chance of being successful. Some of the things you have to do is find out if this person can take a totally opposite position of the position they've taken their whole life and actually give you a coherent argument about the opposite position that they took before. So can they think that way? So I think that's important, because if you can't, it's very hard for you to come into a team and accept pushback. You have to be willing to change your mind, even though you may hold very strong opinions about what you feel. You have to be able to sit in the opposite place and think deeply from an opposite position. You have to be vulnerable, especially as you rise through leadership, and be willing to learn from what other people tell you about yourself and how you work. So all those things are things you have 3-4 interviews, maybe 5 interviews to test them. So you have to really think about them. So that's the best I can think about. And then in the organization, you just want to find ways to keep upping the level of correctness when you bring people into the organization. What did we do right, and how can we make it better in our hiring process? And then onboarding is very, very important. So if somebody is very senior, I try to tell the team that they will be managing to write them a welcome narrative that my eyes would never see, so they don't have to worry about what I think. And they should give it to this person, totally bearing what they think about the challenges and the good and the bad and the ugly about what this person is walking into. Now, to be honest, we do this after we've hired the person. We don't
Right.
do this during the interview process. But the reason we do it is because we just want them to come in eyes wide open and be able to be successful right out of the gate. They will see that the type of people they're working with, what are common things that people are saying. And I think that helps them be successful. Now, we don't do that as you go down. You don't really want to do that. But if as you rise high in the organization, I think it's an important exercise. So those are some of the interesting things I try to do to help with that.
I'm curious for do you guys hire entrepreneurs to kind of run with some of your like top concepts that are maybe more developed? Is that how it works at Harmony Venture Labs? So
Yes.
Are there any non-negotiable values that you look for in those entrepreneurs that you bring on to run with some of your concepts?
Curiosity is a non-negotiable, as in I just don't see how you do this thing without curiosity. You just have to move in the direction of novelty. And if that's not your thing, this is going to be a tough place for you. Humility is a non-negotiable. And humility here doesn't mean that you perceive yourself lowly. Humility here means you perceive other people as being just as worthy and their ideas just as worthy as yours. And you treat them with dignity and respect. So those are non-negotiables. I think an orientation towards action without needing to know all the answers is a non-negotiable, because we just live in a world of the unknown, whether it's at Copysmith AI or whether it's at HVL and any of the HVL companies. And we get our shares of failure. So you kind of have to also be very comfortable with failure. Most of the things we do are going to fail. We try to make them fail on the low level, but everything is an experiment, and we've taken an experiment all the way to company creation, and it still fails, right? So we've had companies with shut down and things like that. So you also have to be comfortable with that. So I would say those are some of the non-negotiables. The a huge non-negotiable is if you're not a learner, I don't even think you get in the door, to be honest. Like, so that's kind of, yeah.
Off the top of your head, are there any industries that you've been thinking about lately that you think are either underserved in the technology space or have opportunity for innovation?
Now you want me to start giving you some of my secrets, but you know what?
Now we want the ideas.
Yeah. But I'm totally fine giving the secrets. I think the world needs everybody solving problems for them. So it's the same thing. We just say what's happening in the world. Let's take an obvious one. The boomers, right? They're going away. I don't mean they're dying. Please, let's not take it.
Retiring.
But my point is they're retiring. And they were huge entrepreneurs. It was a hugely entrepreneurial generation, right? They've created a lot of businesses, a lot of small businesses. But they were also a generation that was not as technology savvy as the ones coming after them. So now you start thinking, what does that mean for the industries these guys were in and girls, right? There are probably many products that didn't succeed because those people were just not anti, but they weren't quite as comfortable with technology. That a 30-something-year-old and 40-something-year-old and 20-something-year-old taking over those businesses can get significant productivity improvements because of the kind of technologies they'll be comfortable with. So that means sometimes you revisit things that have failed in the past, trying to penetrate those industries, and you say, in the current context, and given the behavioral and generational shift, what does that mean? So I'm not giving you specific answers, but I'm giving you how we think about these things, right? So that's one. And then we would also say, who is not properly served? There are lots of people in financial services that are still not properly served. What does that mean? There are lots of challenges around healthcare where people are not properly served. What does that mean? Even around the movement of money. And then there are also these niches that you can think about. In the US, international education is a big market, right? There are all these foreigners that have come here for education that probably have unique challenges that nobody is addressing around financial services, community, and all kinds of stuff. What does that mean? So those are all the pockets you kind of look at and say, hey, how do you deal with this? Even our entry point into some of the services we used to have is changing. So people's entry point into healthcare is changing. Their entry point into financial services is changing. What does that mean? It's very likely that my grandkids' first interaction with healthcare is not going to be their first consciousness, like when they become conscious, right? Beyond their pediatrician's office, it's probably going to be an app that mommy or dad puts in front of them or something like that. What does that mean? Clearly, how people enter the financial industry is changing. Most people our age probably got their first interaction with the financial industry because somebody took you to a bank branch and opened an account for you, or you went to college and you opened an account. Most kids would have already interacted with the financial industry before they get to college age for our children, right? So what does that mean? So there's just a lot of things like that. And then you ask yourself the question, and so what? And where does this go? If our interaction with everyday world changes and it becomes through the lens of things we wear, what kind of world is that? So those are a lot of the things that you just kind of look at. And then you go as crazy as you can on the extreme, and then you reel yourself back in and say what's possible today that's solving a major problem for people and can be the starting point, so.
You heard it here first on Bounce. Everyone who's listening, these are Shegan's tips. So they're a gold mine. Well,
And even some of the things we're thinking about, since I'm in the generous spirit, we're still close to the holidays here. Um, we can think about people's interaction with institutions, right? How is that going to change? Because let's say you're a student talking to the admissions office in a university. Are there different modes of communication you now expect that the universities haven't kind of switched into? So they also have to be thinking about that, because most of the students coming into the institutions probably don't want to get on the phone and talk to them. They don't even want to send them an email.
They don't check their email.
Never.
Exactly.
What
So
is
what does
email?
that, yeah. So what does that mean when you have an admissions officer that's in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they lived in the world of email and phone, and now they're interacting with somebody that doesn't want to check email and doesn't want to talk to you on the phone? How do you talk to this person, and who's going to win between those institutions? So that kind of gives you an idea of how to think about these things.
I'm already spinning with ideas.
That's my job. My job here is to make everybody's head spin with ideas every day.
I'm gonna go back through all the World's Fair submissions since the 30s and see every invention and what we have now in tech that could make those work today. That's what I'm gonna do.
And profitable. Just be careful. You want
Okay, missing that part.
At least have a path to profitability eventually. So that's my bias towards building profitable companies showing there versus companies that just run on VC money. So I have nothing against VC money. I just think you gotta build things that are sustainable.
And if you had any advice for aspiring entrepreneurs or advice for young Shegan when you're first starting out, what would that be?
I think it's a lot of the same things we've talked about. Find ways to get around interesting things and interesting people, even if they're not in your physical vicinity. You can get to them through books, you can get to them through audio, you can get to them through so many ways. So do that, because if it's not in, nothing is going to come out. Like, you can't create things out of a vacuum. Like, life just abhors vacuum. So if it's vacuum, there's not going to be anything coming out of it. So you got to feel it first and then see what happens. So that would be one suggestion that I would give. The other suggestion I would give is take those things and then find what interests you the most and keep peeling the onions to see where it goes. Relationships rule the world. You have to treat people and the relationships that come into your life with high value, because no matter everything else you do, at the end of the day, you're going to find out relationships do rule the world. And sometimes people don't realize that early, and they do too much damage in their journey. So those would be some of the things that I would say to young entrepreneurs. And then the typical cliche things like don't be afraid of failure. I actually think you should be a little bit afraid of failure. Just bet properly, like make high quality bets, not all chips on the table nonstop every time. There are some people that do that and succeed, but they're probably just geniuses that most of us are not. So
or lucky.
If you think, well, all of us are lucky to an extent, but some people do have more genius elements for whatever reason. Or some people don't know how to gauge risk properly, and it ends up working out for them. I think there's also an element of that. I guess that could be called luck also. So yes, that would be some of my advice.
Well, thank you so much, Shegan. We've really enjoyed our conversation today, and we really appreciate you joining us. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. I had a blast. You all let me talk so much. It's crazy.
You had
so many good things to say. Jinx.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you'd like to connect with us, check out our website at bouncepodcast.com.